The person you call your best friend right now, statistically speaking, they are actively holding you back from the person you are biologically wired to become. And the terrifying part? They have no idea they're doing it. Research reveals a chilling reality. Up to 66% of the relationships you classify as a mutual best friendship are entirely unreciprocated. There is a silent, invisible psychological contract you signed the exact moment you decided you were best friends. A contract that subconsciously dictates your income, your ambition, and even your baseline happiness. Today, we are dragging that contract into the light. To understand why your most trusted confidants are actually your biggest evolutionary blind spots, we have to look at a chilling behavioral study from 1998. A study that was quietly brushed aside because the results were simply too uncomfortable for society to digest. By the end of this documentary, you are going to look at your inner circle completely differently, and you will be forced to make a choice. A choice that might just cost you someone you love. Think about how you met your best friend. Dig deep, run the tape back. You probably tell a romanticized story to yourself and others, an instant connection. A shared sarcastic joke, a mutual hatred for a middle management boss or an annoying professor. You call them a kindred spirit, you call it fate. But behavioral science calls it something else entirely. It's called a geographical accident. Enter the Propinquity effect. Coined by psychologists Festinger, Schachter, and Bach during their landmark 1950s MIT housing studies, this principle dictates a brutal truth. The single greatest predictor of interpersonal attraction and deep bonding isn't shared values. It isn't complementary intelligence. It isn't an aligned ambition. It is simply physical proximity. You didn't choose your inner circle because they were the best possible match for your psychological evolution. You chose them because they were assigned the desk next to you in AP History. You chose them because they occupied the cubicle 3 feet to your left. You were biologically trapped in the same square footage, and your brain did what brains do. It adapted to survive the boredom. Combine this with the mere exposure effect, a psychological phenomenon where the human brain develops a deep, irrational preference for things simply because they are familiar. In the hunter-gatherer days, familiarity signaled safety. If you saw the same face every day and they hadn't killed you yet, your primitive brain tagged them as an ally. But in the modern world, safety is the enemy of growth. You spent enough time around this person by sheer geographical chance, and your brain essentially Stockholm syndromed itself into believing they were essential to your existence. But the geographical accident is only half the trap. The other half is a cognitive error known as the misattribution of arousal. Think about the kindred spirit you met at your most toxic job or during the most stressful year of college. When humans experience high-stress, miserable environments, the brain releases cortisol and adrenaline. If you happen to be standing next to someone during this chemical flood, your brain crosses its wires. It misinterprets the intensity of the environment as the intensity of your connection. You didn't bond because your souls aligned. You bonded because you were trapped in the same foxhole. And building a lifelong adult identity around a temporary trauma bond is like building a mansion on a foundation of quicksand. This is exactly why so many workplace best friends are entirely situational. They are surface-level survival alliances based entirely on convenience, and they evaporate the second one of you leaves the job. Here is where the math gets deadly. Enter Dunbar's number. This is the cognitive limit on the number of stable social relationships a human can maintain, sitting strictly around a 50, with only about 5 slots reserved for your absolute inner circle. Every single slot in your core network is highly valuable, scarce cognitive real estate. By permanently filling your most intimate, influential slots with people born of mere proximity, people you bound with over past traumas or childhood geography, you are actively blocking entry. You are erecting a wall that keeps out the mentors, the catalysts, and the disruptors who actually match the person you are trying to become, rather than the person you used to be. So, if you didn't actually choose them, who exactly is sitting in the passenger seat of your life? And more importantly, when you try to change directions, what are they going to do to the steering wheel? You decide to stop drinking. You decide to launch the business. You finally set a firm boundary. Dig into your memory right now. Who is the very first person to offer you a cheat day? Who is the first one to tell you with a smirk that you're changing or taking things too seriously? It is almost always your closest friend. Society tells you this is just harmless banter. It is not. It is a subconscious biological attack. Welcome to the crab bucket protocol. In behavioral science, we don't look at friendships as just two people hanging out. We view them as closed biological ecosystems, and every ecosystem is ruled by one ironclad law: systemic equilibrium, homeostasis. A friend group naturally settles into a hierarchy of habits, income levels, and coping mechanisms. It finds a comfortable, static balance. But when you suddenly decide to evolve, you break the homeostasis. And to the human brain, broken homeostasis is a life or death emergency. According to social baseline theory, developed by neuroscientists at the University of Virginia, the human brain literally outsources its emotional regulation and threat detection to its closest social network. Your friends' brains use you to calculate their own safety in the world. You are a fundamental piece of their psychological baseline. So, when you start waking up at 5 a.m. demanding more out of life or refusing to engage in petty gossip, you aren't just improving yourself. Neurologically speaking, you are pulling the rug out from under their baseline. Their amygdala fires a massive threat response, but it goes deeper and much darker than just a disrupted baseline. It's about cognitive dissonance. Your sudden drive holds up a brutal, unavoidable mirror to their stagnation. If you prove that escaping the hometown, getting fit, or building wealth is actually possible, it destroys their carefully crafted excuses for why they are stuck. To cure this intense psychological pain, their brain has two options. Option A, do the excruciatingly hard work to level up alongside you. Or Option B, subconsciously sabotage you. Mock your efforts. Pull you back down into the bucket so their reality makes sense again. The human brain, ruthlessly optimized for conserving energy, will choose Option B almost 100% of the time. If you have ever tried to outgrow a group, you know exactly what happens next. The moment you pull away, they don't just let you go. Their mockery and invitations actually multiply. In behavioral psychology, this is called an extinction burst. When a rat presses a lever for food and no food comes, it doesn't just calmly walk away, it violently smashes the lever 100 times in a desperate frenzy. When you stop giving your friends the comforting, stagnant version of yourself they rely on, their brain panics. They will aggressively double down on their attempts to drag you back, gossiping about you, aggressively inviting you out, questioning your sanity. It is a biological temper tantrum designed to break your new boundaries. They don't give you bad advice because they are evil. They give you bad advice because your evolution feels like a biological threat to their psychological survival. So, if they are actively holding you down to soothe their own insecurities, why don't you just leave? Why do you stay tethered to people you wouldn't even be friends with if you met them today? Modern society absolutely fetishizes the concept of the day one friend. We are spoon-fed this romanticized narrative that cutting ties with the people who knew you when is a massive moral failure. We weaponize the word loyalty to keep people trapped in relationships that died half a decade ago. But when you look at it through the cold, unforgiving lens of behavioral economics, loyalty isn't a virtue. It is a cognitive bias. Let me introduce you to the sunk cost fallacy. You've probably heard of it in finance. It's the irrational human tendency to continue investing in a failing project simply because you've already invested so much time or money into it. A CEO will keep pouring millions into a dying company because walking away means admitting the past 5 years were a waste. You are doing the exact same thing with your emotional capital. You have known them for 10 years. You have history. You have inside jokes. So, despite the fact that every time you leave hanging out with them you feel drained, uninspired, and completely misunderstood, you stay. You keep paying the subscription fee for a friendship that is hemorrhaging your psychological energy. Often, this bond is artificially sustained through the common enemy mechanism. Friendships often tighten when bonding over shared dislike of a third party, a boss, or society at large. This isn't a bond built on mutual growth. It is a toxic, judgmental ecosystem built on shared resentment. But the sunk cost fallacy isn't the only thing keeping you trapped. there is a much darker mechanism at play. It's a phenomenon known as identity anchoring. To the human brain, identity is everything. It is the anchor of our sanity. But here is the brutal truth. Your oldest friends do not know who you are today. They only know the version of you that existed when you met. They hold your past self hostage. When you interact with them, you subconsciously regress. You suppress your new vocabulary. You hide your new ambitions. You shrink yourself to fit into the psychological box they built for you a decade ago. Why? Because if you show up as your true, evolved adult self, you break their anchor. Staying tethered to these outdated anchors triggers one of the most dangerous phenomena in sociology, the reverse Pygmalion effect. The rule states that human beings will subconsciously alter their performance to meet the expectations of their environment. If your childhood friends still view you as the messy one, the lazy one, or the clown, then micro-expressions and language constantly broadcast that expectation into your subconscious. You will literally self-sabotage your own discipline just to avoid creating friction with their perception of you. You are subconsciously making yourself smaller so their mental image of you doesn't have to grow. In cognitive psychology, to grow up means to let your past selves die. But you cannot let your past self die if your best friend insists on resuscitating it every single Friday night. You aren't staying out of loyalty, you are staying out of cowardice. You are terrified of the emotional void that will open up when you finally admit that the relationship has expired. And if you are holding on because of history, remember this harsh reality regarding frequent betrayals. If they betray you once in a small matter, they will likely do it again in a larger one. A friendship lacking basic structural support isn't a friendship, it's a liability. But what happens when you decide to grit your teeth and stay? What happens when you try to balance your massive new ambitions with your loyalty to the old pack? That's when the invisible contract turns truly malicious. Because while you are trying to pull them up, they are actively keeping score. And deep in their prefrontal cortex, a biological threat architecture is quietly arming itself. Let's get honest for a second. Honest in a way that makes you deeply uncomfortable. When a complete stranger on the internet posts about making $1 million or getting into perfect shape, how do you feel? Maybe a tiny bit jealous, sure. But mostly, you're indifferent. Or perhaps even inspired. Now, when your best friend, the person you grew up with, the person who drinks the same cheap coffee as you, suddenly lands a promotion that doubles their salary, how do you really feel? In that exact microsecond before you force your facial muscles to smile and say, "I'm so happy for you," you feel a sharp, sickening twist in your gut. It feels like a betrayal. Behavioral science doesn't sugarcoat this. This isn't harmless sibling rivalry, it is malignant envy. This is the foundation of the frenemy dynamic. A best friend may feel unacknowledged envy over your success, relationships, or growth. Instead of being happy for you, they secretly desire what you have, leading to passive-aggressive behavior or backhanded compliments. They might not wish you well. When good things happen, their energy shifts, and they subtly diminish your achievements. And you must beware the fast friend, someone who wants to bond immediately. An intense desire to bond too quickly is a massive red flag. It often masks ulterior motives and indicates a frenemy who thrives on the dysfunction and drama of a highly enmeshed relationship. But why does this happen? Let's consult Leon Festinger and his groundbreaking 1954 social comparison theory. Festinger didn't just suggest we compare ourselves to others, he proved that we have an insatiable drive to evaluate our own opinions and abilities. But here is the deadly caveat: the brain does not compare us to people who are vastly different. Your brain couldn't care less about Elon Musk's bank account. He is a different species as far as your social circuitry is concerned. The psychological pain of comparison only occurs when you compare yourself to a peer, to someone you consider your equal in origin, intelligence, and potential. Your best friend is your ultimate behavioral benchmark. In neuroscience, relative status is calculated in the striatum, the same part of the brain that processes raw reward and dopamine. When your closest peer moves ahead of you, your brain doesn't process it as "they won," processes it as "I lost." Your best friend's success literally drops your biological status in your shared ecosystem. And human beings are wired to defend their status at almost any cost. But the envy architecture hides a much darker secret. It's driven by the zero-sum fallacy. Primitive human brains evolved in environments of extreme scarcity. If your peer found a berry bush, it meant there were fewer berries for you. Today, wealth and success are infinite, but your amygdala hasn't received the software update. When your friend succeeds, your brain genuinely believes they have stolen a piece of your potential, which leads to the ultimate taboo, Schadenfreude, the involuntary rush of pleasure you feel when your closest peer fails. When their startup goes under or their relationship ends, your brain releases a hit of dopamine, because their failure temporarily restores your relative status. If your friendship requires one of you to fail just so the other can feel safe, you are not friends. You are competitors in a covert war. This envy is the silent rot that defines long-term static friendships. If you are stuck and they remain stuck, you are allies against the world. But the second you start to rise, you activate their biological threat architecture. This dynamic is precisely why financial toxicity is a death sentence for these bonds. Lending money or engaging in business deals with stagnant best friends frequently leads to the immediate end of the friendship. It introduces hard metrics into an ecosystem built on unspoken emotional debt. So, what do you do to avoid activating that architecture in them? How do you keep the peace? By performing an act of self-mutilation so subtle you don't even realize you're doing it. Think about the person you are when you are completely, totally alone. The way you think, the things you actually care about, the ambition that keeps you awake at night. Now, think about the person you magically transform into the second you walk into a room with your core group of friends. You lower your vocabulary. You laugh at jokes you don't actually find funny. You complain about your job, even if you secretly like it, because complaining is the native language of the group. You are not a real person when you are with them. You are a composite, a carefully curated avatar designed not to trigger their insecurities. In behavioral psychology, this is known as high self-monitoring. Your brain is constantly scanning the social environment, detecting the microscopic boundaries of what is acceptable to the pack, and aggressively editing your personality in real time to fit inside those boundaries. When you combine this with behavioral contagion, the subconscious mimicry of the emotions and habits of those closest to you, you begin paying what psychologists call the chameleon tax. Every time you shrink your ambition to avoid making your best friend feel bad, you pay the tax. Every time you adopt their cynical worldview just to have something to talk about, you pay the tax. But you don't pay this tax with money. You pay it with your identity. You might think you can handle the chameleon tax. You think, I'll just fake it for a few hours at the bar, then go home and work on my goals. You are mathematically wrong. Behavioral science calls this ego depletion. Willpower and cognitive control draw from a finite biological energy reserve in your prefrontal cortex. Spending 3 hours aggressively suppressing your true personality, biting your tongue, and faking laughter doesn't just annoy you. It biologically exhausts your brain. When you finally get home, you don't have the neurological fuel left to build your business, study, or evolve. Your friends aren't just wasting your time, they are literally draining the biological fuel required for your future. And it gets worse when you factor in confidant overload. Being a best friend often means carrying the weight of their bad choices, their secrets, and their unmanaged mental health struggles. Knowing too much is a heavy, toxic burden. The dark side of this manipulation is that boundaries are frequently crossed. The expectation that a best friend must be available for everything at all hours can lead to unhealthy control, where one person demands intimate details, violating your psychological boundaries under the guise of closeness. You can never know everything about a person. Even if you share everything, people have private lives and dark thoughts they never reveal. But the demand that you must absorb theirs is a fast track to burnout. Over years, or decades, of constant micro-adaptations to appease a stagnant friend group, a terrifying psychological crisis occurs: identity fragmentation. You literally forget what you actually believe. You lose the ability to distinguish your own internal voice from the collective voice of the bucket. You become an extra in the movie of your own life. to find yourself, to actually achieve the biological evolution you are capable of. You have to do the unthinkable. You have to burn the chameleon. You have to stop self-monitoring. And when you do, when you finally show up as your unapologetic, growing self, the ecosystem will reject you. The friendship will break. And society will tell you that you are a terrible person for letting it happen. But society is lying. And the proof has been hidden in plain sight for over 2 decades. It is time to close the loop. It is time to open the file they didn't want you to read. In the late 1990s, behavioral researchers and sociologists began compiling massive amounts of longitudinal data on human social networks. They wanted to answer a simple question: what happens to a human being over a lifetime if they maintain the exact same friend group? The data was meant to celebrate long-term loyalty. Instead, it revealed something so uncomfortable that mainstream psychology largely ignored the implications for decades. The individuals who clung onto their original, proximity-based friend groups didn't just stagnate socio-economically. They experienced lower rates of neuroplasticity. Their cognitive flexibility, their ability to adapt to new information, solve complex modern problems, and reinvent themselves, literally calcified. The study illuminated a brutal biological reality. Outgrowing your friends is not a tragedy. It is a biological imperative. It is a process formerly known as strategic social shedding. To evolve, your brain requires novel stimuli. It requires you to mirror new behaviors, adopt higher-level vocabularies, and exist in environments that force your baseline to rise. You cannot achieve this if your cognitive real estate is completely occupied by people whose primary psychological function is to remind you of who you used to be. Sociologist Mark Granovetter proved this decades ago with his legendary theory, the strength of weak ties. Granovetter discovered a terrifying paradox. Your closest friends, your strong ties are practically useless for your life's actual progression. Why? Because they share your exact same network. They know the same people, read the same things, and have access to the exact same limited opportunities you do. Life-changing breakthroughs, the million-dollar ideas, the massive career leaps, the highest-level mentors almost always come from weak ties, acquaintances, strangers, people outside your static bubble. But you will never have the time, energy, or bandwidth to follow those weak ties into the stratosphere if you are chained to the dense, heavy rock of your core group. But I feel guilty, you say. I feel like a traitor. Listen to me very carefully. That guilt, it is not a moral compass. It is a software glitch. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, if you abandoned your tribe, even if they were holding you back, you would freeze to death or be eaten by a predator. Your brain evolved to flood your system with agonizing guilt and anxiety the moment you considered leaving the pack, purely as a survival mechanism. But you do not live in the Pleistocene epoch anymore. Leaving your stagnant friends behind will not result in you being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. It will result in you finally having the time and psychological space to build the life you secretly know you deserve. So, how do you escape the proximity illusion without unnecessarily detonating your entire life? How do you sever the invisible contract? You do not need a dramatic confrontation. You do not need to send a long, emotional text message that will only trigger their cognitive dissonance and result in an argument. Behavioral science gives us a much cleaner, much more effective protocol: controlled social pruning. Step 1 is boundary renegotiation. You must actively begin starving the relationship of its most valuable resource, your emotional access. When they text you to complain about their life for the 100th time, do not offer solutions. Do not mirror their outrage. Give them a polite, utterly neutral response. That sounds tough. Sorry to hear that. You must become an emotional brick wall. Without the dopamine hit of your mirrored outrage, their brain will slowly stop viewing you as a viable source for emotional offloading. If you have to choose between your self-respect and your friend, you must walk away. Step 2 is the title downgrade. This happens entirely in your own mind. You must strip them of the title best friend. The title of best friend carries unconscious obligations. It forces you to attend events you hate, listen to stories you don't care about, and subsidize their bad decisions. By internally recategorizing them as a historical acquaintance, you instantly dissolve the sunk cost fallacy. You are no longer abandoning a best friend. You are simply managing an acquaintance. You must accept the inevitable evolution of human bonds. Friendships are often seasonal. Not all friendships are meant for a lifetime. As people change, mature, and change jobs or lifestyles, the foundational reasons for the friendship disappear. It is not uncommon for your number one to be replaced by a spouse, a new high-level peer, or simply the natural drift of time. It is okay to grow apart. A friend breakup is often necessary for your own mental health, especially if your best friend has become a source of negativity while you seek growth. And finally, step 3. The hardest part. The void. When you prune the dead weight, your calendar will clear up. Your phone will stop buzzing. You will experience a profound, terrifying loneliness. Do not panic. Do not run back to the crab bucket just because it's warm. You must understand the social vacuum principle. The universe, and human psychology, abhors a vacuum. You cannot meet the new, elevated version of your tribe while your calendar is clogged with the ghosts of your past. High-value individuals, people who are driven, authentic, and evolved, have an incredible radar. If they sense that your energy is split, or that you are still tethered to a low-frequency crab bucket, they will not invest in you. You have to prove to your own subconscious that you value your future more than your comfort. You must create the empty space first. The isolation isn't the end of the story, it is the clearing of the stage. That loneliness is not a punishment, it is an empty runway. It is the absolute prerequisite for new, high-level connections to land in your life. You cannot attract a mentor, a business partner, or a true psychological peer if you are constantly surrounded by the static noise of your past. The invisible contract is torn up. The proximity illusion is broken. You now know exactly what is happening in the shadows of your closest relationships. The same person you trust with your deepest secrets can turn into a person you hate due to shifting life paths and unspoken competition. The people who knew you when are the exact people who will stop you from becoming who you are meant to be. So, who are you going to text back after this video ends?